good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining our webinar. Welcome to the first webinar from Parrot Society Singapore, and we are very pleased to launch this webinar on this very special day for parrots, also known as World Parrot Day. I'm not sure how many of you know about this special day, but here is a little bit of info about this day. World Parrot Day is actually held every year on the 31st of May, and this special day was started by the World Parrot Trust in 2004 as a way to raise awareness of threatened and endangered parrot species worldwide. It is also an important day for both parrot owners and parrot welfare organizations like us, Parrot Society Singapore, as it is a good chance for us to raise awareness about the welfare needs of captive parrots as well. This actually brings us to a very perfect topic to discuss today, and this is a question that maybe some of you parrot owners out there might be faced with, which is, why is my parrot plucking? So many owners are faced with this concern, not only because their parrot is currently plucking. So maybe some of you have experience with parrots who are plucking their feathers and bald spots and so on and so forth. But also maybe you might be worried whether your parrot might be plucking in future and how this can be managed or prevented. So this webinar is co-hosted by Parrot Society Singapore and Beecroft Avian and Exotics Veterinary Clinic as a special event for World Parrot Day. I'm excited to introduce our esteemed speaker for the day. We are thrilled to welcome Dr. Rina Maguire, co-founder and head of the Avian and Exotics Department at Beecroft Animal Specialist and Emergency Hospital, which is located along Alexandra Road in Singapore. With over 18 years of experience in exotic animal medicine, Dr. Maguire is one of the few globally recognized specialists in exotic companion mammals and also a respected leader in Singapore's exotic veterinary field. Some of you may already know her because maybe you have taken your pets to her clinic before, but if you don't, here's your chance to hear from her and to get to know about Dr. Rina in this exclusive webinar. So before we get started, I want to talk about the Q&A function of this Google Meet. At any point of the webinar, if you have any burning questions at all, please, that is related to this topic, of course, please feel free to type your questions in the Q&A box. How to find the Q&A box is very simple. If you look into the menu bar at the bottom, be it whether you're on your phone or on your desktop or iPad, look for this menu options that consists of 9 dots, not the one that has 3 dots, the one that has 9 dots, okay? So click on it and then activities, and then you will see a button to click for Q&A. Type your questions in there. So what we'll do is we'll be moderating the questions in case there are some repeats or maybe overlap topics. We'll be approving certain questions to be addressed at the end of the webinar, but you can type in your questions at any point in time. And we also kindly request that everyone remains muted with your video turned off and your mic as well in order not to affect the quality of this webinar. And this webinar will be recorded and posted at a later date if you wish to revisit it or to share with your friends. So without any further delay, I would like to pass the time over to Dr. Rina to share with us about feather picking in parrots.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining me on Saturday morning and taking the time to learn about birds. So one of my other passions, other than treating animals and birds in particular, is actually education and talking to people like you guys. And I also enjoy teaching students as well as other veterinarians about my passion, which is about exotic animals. So my first love is actually birds. Even though I'm a specialist in exotic companion mammals, I myself have African grey parrot, and I do have 2 pet chickens as well. So I understand, of course, how it's kind of disturbing sometimes when our pet birds develop behavioral issues, and in some cases we want to know why, right? So is it something that we're doing wrong? And sometimes captivity can bring up these issues that can develop over time. So what can we do differently, and how do we kind of treat it if it does happen to our pet birds? So the topic of my presentation today is, why is my bird picking? So feather loss. So it's a very common, I would say, and frustrating presentation. And the cause can also be divided into a medical, versus a non-medical cause. So when I have a patient being brought to me for feather picking, I usually counsel the clients about the possibility for it being medically derived or whether it's something to do with the environment. So first off, we usually would run through a physical exam and rule out medical causes first, because if it's a medical reason that the bird is picking, I would assume there's a degree of discomfort that's associated with the condition that is making the bird want to actually pick itself because it doesn't know how to respond to the pain. So things that can happen, I guess, would be things, agents such as bacteria infections, viral infections, in some cases even metabolic causes, calcium deficiencies, allergies. So those are things that can be kind of worked up by doing blood tests, by doing X-rays, and in some cases even just questioning and asking, is there any changes in the environments that could have brought up these issues. If, let's say, the medical workup shows that there's nothing abnormal, then we start thinking about, hey, look, could it be a behavioral cause? So this first exam, usually when we presented with a bird with a feather picking, it's usually a very extensive consultation. So let's talk a little bit about this feather destructive behavior and kind of delve deeper into this subject. So the feathers are usually chewed or pulled out, and generally the birds that are presented for feather picking are not really very sick, right? So they come in when they're happy, they're bright, but then they just have very poor feathering. Typically, it's a lifelong problem. Unfortunately, it can develop into a habit. So I always tell people, it's something like a person biting their nails. Sometimes the bird just can't help themselves, and they will just keep doing it, and it becomes like a habit, and they keep going at themselves again and again. So I feel it's more common in larger birds and parrots. I seldom see it in budgies or little parrotlets. I'm not saying that it's not possible, but it's less common. It can be a medical issue, and I do see it in smaller birds. For example, there's a syndrome in cockatiels where they will actually pick underneath their wings when they have a parasite such as giardia. Or in some cases, I see them picking on the leg, maybe due to some kind of chronic pain or injury to the foot. So let's talk about how these birds would behave and the environment that they would live in the wild. It's totally different. So a captive bird would be typically in the cage most of the time. They will have access perhaps to a perch or play gym during the day when the clients are, the owners are around. And usually there will be limited sunlight. So when you think about these parrots in the wild, they would be sitting high up on the branch of a tree, in the treetop, where they have access to a limitless amount of sunlight. So I think that's one of the factors. And the other thing that they would also be doing would be looking for food. They'll be foraging, flying from treetop to treetop, exploring, and spending a lot of time maybe exercising, kind of doing a very busy animal. They don't just sit there. Whereas our pets, are slightly different. They have different habits. So wild birds, I guess, don't really pluck. So the question is this anxiety in our captive bird, that makes them pick at themselves? A bird does have to kind of learn how to be a bird. So, in a lot of these more progressive countries, for bird welfare anyway, they've kind of banned people from actually buying birds that are hand-raised. So they are allowing the parents to actually raise the bird, and then once the bird is actually weaned, then they would actually remove them from the parents and sell them. So the reason why these countries are starting to recognize it is because they realize that birds that are hand-raised, either by the pet shop or in some cases even worse, by pet owners, and they don't know that they are bird. They kind of realize, they think that they are actually part of a human flock rather than a bird flock. So there's none of these parent thought skills to deal with situations, to deal with anxiety, to deal with frustrations, and maybe even for recognition of future relationships when they're actually sexually mature and they're not recognizing themselves as being a bird, and they're actually going to become frustrated, because they're thinking, hey, I'm a person and I can't make my partner. So this kind of behavior actually starts really early on in life. And it's something that I guess, unfortunately, a lot of our pet birds have already been in this situation before our time, so they're already in our care and there's nothing we can do about it. But maybe for future pet parents, like if you're trying to get a bird for the future, maybe this is something we can think about. If you want a bird that's going to be more socially adapt, maybe get a bird that's raised by the parents. So self-injurious behaviors are seen in other intelligent species that are also raised in isolation. For example, like chimps, animals that are primates that actually not being raised as part of a flock. They will get this stereotypical behavior, maybe casing, they would injure themselves, so maybe it's kind of, you can question, like maybe our pet birds, if they're kept in isolation, could it be that that's what part of the anxiety that comes with it? So could it be that feather picking is a coping mechanism? Sounds typical, like you might call it like bird cutting, so maybe it gives them discomfort when they do this behavior, but unfortunately, it's something that it's harmful to them. So of course you've seen pictures like this before, I'm sure, either in person or online, So it's fairly common, and of course it can be very disturbing as a pet owner when your bird does this to themselves, because you always kind of reflect back, like, what am I doing wrong that my bird looks like this, right? So typically they would be picking on their chest. Sometimes they will even go after their wings, so they call it the primary wings, and the feathers on the outside, and the secondaries. So they'll just chew it up, and they will always have a nice full head of feathers. So they always look like a lion almost. So let's talk a little bit about feathers, right? So like what are feathers for, right? So wild birds are a lot of the non-parrot species, they're usually typically sexual dimorphic. So in our parrots, some of them are, so like the eclectus, the ringnecks, even the cockatiel, some of them, and unless it's a mutation, they have certain traits. So the boys will look a certain way, the girls look a certain way. So you could kind of reason like feathers make birds recognize who's a boy and who's a girl, right? So this is for mating perspective. So in some cases as well, the colors would change. If let's say they're going into a mating season, the colors will become brighter. So there are some reasons why birds have feathers. So when the bird is born, usually it will be naked, right? So they were usually they need their parents. They're very dependent on their parents. So this is the period where the mother plays a very important aspect in actually raising the pet bird. So in terms of the other aspects, other than the feathers, what else is important? It's also the skin, right? So if you've ever looked at the bird's skin, it looks a little bit like this. So it's kind of like a bluish tinge with a pink aspect to it. And it has this little, I guess, glands, little follicles where the feather erupts from. They look like little dots. Right, so this is how a bird looks like when it doesn't have feathers. You can actually see almost like the feathers are trying to come through the skin, and it looks like almost like little I guess pimples, you could say. Okay, so the feathers usually grow symmetrically in symmetrical tracks. So if they molt on one side, you'll find the other side will molt almost at the same time, and maybe a few days apart. So there is a gland called the uropedial gland, and I always look at this when I examine the bird. So it's actually at the base of the tail, on the top part of the tail. Okay, so it's actually also called the oil gland, and it produces this very oily secretion, which you normally don't see. Okay, and the bird, when they groom themselves, they will take the oil from this gland, and in a normal bird, they will spread it all over the feathers. So I see this sometimes when the gland is swollen, such as the picture down below on the bottom left. You'll see that the feathers are kind of bald, and then you see this kind of bilobed appearance of the gland, so that this bird has a painful, swollen uropedial gland. Okay, which question is like, why, right? So maybe the bird is not grooming, it's not pulling the oil from this area. In some cases, it could be an infection due to vitamin A deficiency that causes the gland to become abnormal. So they call it metaplasia, where the gland suddenly is unable to produce the oil, and everything gets jammed and stuck in there, and the gland just gets bigger. And I've even seen it become like an abscess. Okay, so when you pick your feathers once, it's fine, or your feather drops, it's fine, right? But if you keep pulling and pulling, it can actually damage the actual kind of like the follicle. And then what will happen is that new feathers won't grow at all. So that's kind of like a end result of years of picking. So there are many different types of feathers on the bird, so kind of like I always tell people, it's like almost like eyelash or your own hair, it will drop, and then when it drops, new one comes out, right? So in a normal cycle, it may take maybe days for the feathers to grow back in. But for full feathers, it may take a few weeks. So sometimes when you're molting, like sometimes people are like, how do I know if it's molting versus is it picking? So when you're molting, you will find that it's not really like a baldness to it. You'll find a whole bunch of feathers, but your bird looks perfect, right? So that's okay. But when you kind of see that the feathers are actually kind of sparse and patchy, that's when we start saying, hey, look, is my bird actually picking? Yeah, so that's the main difference. So you can see all the beautiful feathers there. You can see the wing feathers looks different from the down versus the tail versus the contour. And then they have the what you call semi-plume feather as well. Yeah, so these are all the very complex nature of the feathers that, of course, they use it, as we mentioned, for recognition of species, of course, for flight, for waterproofing the bird, so they all have different roles for our pet birds. Okay, so as I mentioned, molting. What is molting? Molting is defined as a periodic shedding of old feathers and replacement by new growth in symmetrical and stages. The new feathers, as you can see in the picture on the left, it has an active blood supply and nerve supply. So if your bird has this kind of feathers, don't try and like play with it too much, because they will get angry or probably try to bite you. Why? Because due to the nerve, it's still very painful. Okay, so when the feather is ready to come out, the bird will use its beak and kind of bite at it a little bit, and the sheath will actually fall out, and then you have a beautiful feather that comes out of it. So these new feathers are called blood feathers. Yeah, so sometimes I do help the birds when they have it on their head, because when it's on their head and they don't have a mate, they can't get the sheath off. So you might notice like everywhere looks good, and then at the top of the head they have like little sticks, like little blood feathers. So once it's ready to come out, just give them a gentle scratch. All the little dust will come apart, and the sheath will be released. Okay, so baby birds. So baby birds look scruffy because they will keep their first set of feathers until early adolescence, at which time they have their first molt, and then they look better. So there's sometimes another common question I have, like people coming in with their kind of younger birds, baby birds, and they're like, is my bird sick? Like, why does it look like this? So they always look kind of down, don't look so nice until they have their first molt. Okay, so that's normal. So, of course, there are viruses, that they're called, one big one, I guess, is called circle virus, or bird and the citizen beak and feather disease is the actual name of the disease that is caused by circle virus. And yes, of course, if the feathers don't come in and the bird looks terrible, and that would be like, at the age of 7 months, and you have these kind of birds that don't look better. Yeah, so then you have to bring it to the vet, because then it's a suspicion that maybe it is infected, unfortunately, for virus. All right, so I want to talk a little bit about stress bars, right? So when we're talking about feathers and feather picking, I think it's important to recognize like how do normal feathers look like. So stress bars are these horizontal ridges of lines, and it goes across the feather. And usually it's caused by an interruption in the growth of the feather from a stressful event. All right, so if I see it in a very young bird, so let's say below the age of like a year, I can kind of justify it being that it is kind of something that kind of happened during the molting, the weaning phase of the bird. So when the bird is taken away from the parents, being sold to a new owner, things like that, sort of change of hands, at the time of its life, it may develop some of these bars, but I don't expect to see it in an adult bird. Okay, so those bars, you can see they're kind of black. Okay, so I always look for them when I actually do a physical exam. So if your bird is an adult bird and it does have these lines, then I would advise that you kind of bring it to a vet and just say, hey, look, what's going on? I think my bird is not well. Okay, preening. So how do I tell if the bird is preening versus picking, right? That's another common question I get. So if you think about preening, it is normal, right? So all birds, even in the wild, you see them, they always groom themselves. They spend a long time grooming themselves, and that's something that it's normal. Okay, so poor preening though is more common in hand-raised birds. Okay, so birds that are imprinted on humans and they don't get this kind of like teaching from the parents, they won't get good preening habits. So there is a kind of a theory that this is actually genetically dictated, and they learn when they look at other birds that, like, look, my buddy is preening over there. That's how it looks like. I'm going to do it. So it kind of copies. So one bird starts preening, whole flock of them start preening. Okay, so when they don't have a conspecific, so no one to actually learn from, that's when they may develop over preening. Right, so this is just a diagram to show you what happens when a bird preens its feathers. Okay, so this is before preening on the left, and then on the right is after preening. Okay, so it's kind of like they're able to zip up the feathers. Okay, so you can see the feather itself has these barbs on it, the barbules, okay, and hooks among itself. Okay, so when the bird preens properly, this is properly, if improper, it won't happen. They will actually kind of make them all align, and then it looks beautiful again, right? So sometimes when I examine the bird, it looks all ruffled, like because I'm pulling the feathers, I'm looking at things, I'm kind of doing things, and they look terrible. And then they shake, and then they preen a little bit, and suddenly they look beautiful again. So that's how they actually zip together these barbules. Okay, just additional photos to show you, okay, about how the preening process, what happens. So this is a casing. You can see the picture on the right, where the kind of the sheath is actually taken out, and the beautiful feathers inside. So of course this one hasn't been preened yet, right? Because then after this, the bird will actually do kind of its thing where it kind of zips all those bubbles together and will flatten out and become like a beautiful feather. Okay, so what is pole preening, right? And how does it look like? Okay, so this is how pole preening looks like. So the animal, you can see, has very dull feathering. Okay, so like this blue and gold, it's not really gold anymore. It's kind of like a orangey, dull gold color. Yeah, so, and you can see the kind of the structure of the feathers, they're all kind of unzipped. All right, so there's no way for you to teach the bird. Some people might think, hey, look, can I teach the bird how to preen? Unfortunately, it's impossible. I guess you can try showing it videos maybe of other birds preening in the hope that you can learn from a video, but it might not be possible. I'm not sure. Yeah, so of course, if you start seeing this very young, then it may become a habit, and then it will develop throughout its life that it will become more feather picked as it gets older. Okay, so if you have a partner, this is what you get, right? Other than the love, you get the preening as well. So you can see this two birds here. They're kind of having a good time. This green cheek, yeah. So they're kind of using their beaks, and they'll kind of just pull all the feathers, that are ready to come out, and they kind of groom themselves. You can see the quaker on the left. It has all those painful in a way and not so nice looking pin feathers on its head. So of course, if it doesn't have a mate, then the owner has to go and kind of gently help release it. Okay. So there is, of course, the other aspect of it where I do see, not very often, but sometimes over preening. Okay, can be a form of cage mate aggression. Okay, so this one, they're really going at each other and just pulling all the feathers off. Now they look almost like a vulture. Okay, so poor feathering, coming back to it, is a common presentation. So is it lifestyle versus medical versus behavior, right? So lifestyle, that's to kind of summarize everything: poor preening habits, cage mate trauma. Could it be trauma from the environment? I've had some cages that are too small, and the bird has a night fright and it bangs its feathers against the edge of the wall of the cage, the bars of the cage, and it keeps breaking. Okay, so if I see it and it's only on one side, I always question, hey, look, show me a picture of your cage. Let me see whether it's suitable. I've had also sometimes the bar, like the perch of the cage, is way too low, and the bottom of the tail keeps getting rubbed. Okay, so on the bottom, and then it just kind of tears and kind of becomes more frayed. Or maybe the bird likes to play, like sit down the bottom of the cage all the time, and you have these metal grids, and the bird's feathers just get caught too much. So poor wing clip, of course, can result in falls. But this is another very heated topic, which might need another discussion. Should I trim my bird's wings or not? Birds are meant to fly on the one side. But if I don't trim his feathers, will my bird fly away, or could it get injured in the house? So of course, there's no right or wrong in this. I think there's pros and cons to each. But a poor wing trim is definitely no excuse, okay, for it. So there's a lot of information about how to trim wings. If you're going to do it yourself, do it properly. If you're not sure, you have to consult a veterinary professional to advise you on how to do this properly. Okay, so other aspects could be medical problems. So let's dive into it. So parasites, lice, and mites. I would say this is not as common in an adult bird. If I'm seeing a 2-3-year-old or 4-year-old bird with feather picking, would I assume it's lice and mites? Probably not, because like why now, right? Because unless your bird is free flying and it goes out and it mingles with the pigeons and the canaries, whatever, like in the wild, and it picks something up, sure. But if let's say it doesn't actually fly outside, it doesn't go to a tree branch, and you've had it only in your house, then where would you get these parasites? So so if it does, if it's a young bird and you've just adopted it or purchased it, maybe I would think about it. Or if let's say you do harvest like wooded branches from outside, yes, but potentially that's where you get it. Or I've had some clients where they let miners and pigeons and doves from the outside come in to share food, to be friends with their pet parrot. And yes, of course, I would think about parasite, because this is where you would have a wild bird bringing parasites to a close flock. Intestinal giardia, it's fairly common. So these are low motile protozoa, which I usually see in the stool. So when I examine the stool under a microscope, I might see them. And other than causing quite bad diarrhea, loose stools, it may also cause itchiness, usually in cockatiels. Okay, or sometimes even parakeets or budgerigas. So if we see small birds, we would definitely do a fecal check if they have itchy skin. Fairly common 0.3 would be vitamin A deficiency. I think this would be one of the biggest, highest culprit of feather picking. We have this dull feathering, so that the bird in the picture on the slide, you can see it's like brownish color, dull. When questioned, maybe they would say, look, I only feed it seeds, it only wants to eat seeds, then vitamin A deficiency will be a big one. So vitamin A or carotenoids give your bird its vibrant color. It is found in a wide variety of foods. So things like fruits that are brightly colored, or if you have like vegetables such as like pumpkin or sweet potato, those kind of fruits will have a lot of vitamin A. I always tell people tropical fruits are the best because it's widely available and it's very rich in vitamin A. Get things like papaya, or the melons, things like that. Very, very healthy for our pet birds. Okay, so they should definitely get it, if possible, every day. Okay, in addition to pellets. So pellets, of course, would be something that they can have because it's in a way well balanced. But I wouldn't say it's perfect. On its own, I wouldn't say pellets are a perfect diet. Endocrine problems, this is not that common, but we can see, they call it hypothyroid. Okay, so hypothyroid will cause your bird to become abnormal in terms of its feathering. The feathers will just drop. Or you might see birds that also have like other things like heart disease. They'll be losing weight, So of course we can test their thyroid levels. Feather infections, I guess in Singapore, I would say it's not that common. I've seen a couple, but it is equivalent to like a HIV infection in a human. The PBMD is a very debilitating disease. So it's very common in, I guess, Australia. So you have it with even the free-flying flock of cockatoos, where you have these birds that have terrible feathers, and usually they have a very short lifespan because the immunity will get poor, they get infection, and they will pass away. Okay, so yes, beta-carotene, provitamin A. Okay, so why you need it? You need it for your epithelial. Epithelial just means type of skin cells. Okay, when you have a deficiency in this, it causes the cells to become thickened. Yeah, so and then it becomes like the picture in there where you see the foot. It's actually kind of red, and you have these thickened plugs of skin. Okay, this of course is an extreme case. The other thing I also see sometimes are the beak. They have this hyperkeratosis, which means that the beak is no longer smooth, but it has this like patchy layering on top of it. And you see that, of course, it needs a big trim, right? But in addition, I would talk about supplementing with vitamin A. Okay, so talking a little bit about beak and feather disease again. So it's usually more common in young birds, less than the age of 3. Very contagious. Yeah? So of course, if you know your bird has it, please don't have a party and invite all the other birds to come around, because you might make your other birds also sick. Yeah? So it's very contagious. It spreads, it's aerosolized, so it's spread through the dander, it's spread through the secretions that the bird produces, such as the fecal, or even if it sneezes, the virus will just go everywhere. So you can see this bird has really weird feathers. They call them like club feathers, where the feathers are not coming out of the sheath and they're all bunched up. So, and it's very debilitating. Yes, it will cause also sometimes the beak to actually kind of even fall off or get necrotic. And it's slow disease and it's highly fatal. There is a blood test to actually test for this virus. All right. So giardia and plucking of in birds. So you can see some pictures there. Some, there's a fecal, we call it a fecal gram stain. I'm sure if you've been to a vet, the vet talks about fecal gram stains quite a bit. So that's when we take the poo and we put some stains on it, to make it different colors, and we look at it under the microscope. So giardia, like I mentioned earlier, budgies, cockatiel, lovebirds, I would definitely want to check their stool. There are some tests that we can run to actually check it. And the good news is that it is very easily treated. So there is a thought that sometimes giardia can be found in tap water. So you might say, hey, how come but we are drinking tap water? But I guess some birds are very sensitive to it. So for humans, even like if we drink water that's contaminated with giardia, there's a certain amount that the government will allow that is not toxic. But after a certain level, they pick up more organisms, then they would start, kind of treating the water more. Yeah, but birds that are very particular to it, then some people will even use bottled water. Okay, so what do I do when I have a bird that's feather picking, right? So we examine the bird, we look for a pattern, right, of destruction. So I get more concerned if I see it on one area. So let's say my bird only picks on the right wing, then I would want to do an X-ray, for example, of the wing to see whether there's any bony changes. Is it any like osteomyelitis or bone infection, or is there any injury that had happened, that's causing the bird to pick? Yeah, so that would be definitely concerning. If the bird is picking everywhere, then I guess it's we'll be thinking more of like, could it be more behavioral? I've had birds that, of course, also pick over their chest, and it ends up being they have like heart disease. So definitely, it might give clues to the vet when it's picking. So I use this Amazon parrot just to give you an idea. Like you couldn't tell, right? So you just pick like that, and then it ended up being it had a hypothyroid disease, which is the underproducing of a thyroid hormone. So work it up, right? Work it up. So definitely, when we have this bird that looks like this, we ask a bunch of questions at the exam. We ask for, they call it stresses or anxious situations. So like, is there any new family members? Sometimes I've had even birds that pick when there's a new boyfriend, a new girlfriend, a new partner, a new wife, So sometimes that's enough to actually make birds pick. New baby, that's a big one. New baby. Movement of houses. So definitely that's another stressor for the bird. Movement of the cage. So suddenly the bird's being pushed to the center of the cage. Family thinks, oh, I want the bird to have more attention, right? Push it in the center of the room. And suddenly the bird starts picking more. So sometimes birds are more shy. Some animals, they just want to be having their back against the wall might be enough for an anxious bird to stop picking, because they feel like they're in the center, someone startles them, walks behind them, and they don't know who it is because they can't see at the back of their head, right? So I've had birds that get startled when they are near the window because suddenly they have these hornbills outside, maybe giving them the evil eye, or some hawks flying down, and then they get scared. So we have to kind of really discuss the whole environment and figure out if there's something that could be stressing the bird. Okay, so then thorough exam, like we talked about, listen to the heart. We look at the respiratory rate, make sure it's not infection. Check their skin, look for signs of vitamin A deficiency. Check their beak, check the roof of their mouth. Extend all their wings. Make sure there's no, they call it contraction. So sometimes some animals get a very severe pain, because they can't stretch their wings out properly. All right, and then of course then we do the diagnostics after that. There is this thing called a skin biopsy, which is on this next slide. So a skin biopsy, obviously you can think about it like a human, right? So if we had a skin disease of unknown etiology, like say your skin is very itchy, your dermatologist might say, hey, I might need a sample of that skin because I need to send it to the lab to find out what's going on. Why are you itchy? I don't know. Let's get a sample to the lab. So same with bird medicine. Sometimes your bird vet can look at the skin, but we don't know what's going on with the skin. Like why is the bird picking? Maybe there's an allergy. So I've had birds that are allergic to tofu, or they're allergic to sunflowers. So it can happen. So usually we do what you call a paired biopsy. We would take a sample from the area that's picked, and then we would take a sample from a normal skin area, and we would tell the pathologist, hey, look, compare these two samples and tell me, are they different? So if they only see, damage of the follicles, there's no inflammation of the tissue, doesn't look like allergy, right? Or if, let's say, unfortunately, they find lymphoma cells, so they can get cancer, or they say squamous cell carcinoma. So then we know, okay, unfortunately, the bird has cancer. So there are some ways we can diagnose it, but of course, we need some, like some compliance, like the owner has to let us anesthetize the bird to get a sample. You can see in the picture on the left, the bird is safely intubated. We have clear airway. We have a way of giving the bird breaths when it's actually asleep, so that the anesthesia is kept safe. And it's a fairly routine and quite a quick procedure. Maybe I would say half an hour at the most. Okay, so we go on now to therapy, right? People want to know, how do I fix it? Enough about what is it about? Like, tell me how to fix it, right? So, of course, you have to find out why. And then once you know why, you adjust the diet and the environment. Behavior modification is quite challenging, So when you talk about to a behaviorist, so there are these people, maybe not in this country, but maybe in the States, or where I train in the US. So I train under a bird specialist, and I met a bird behaviorist. So there's a lot of training that is involved to become like specialized in this field. So there are these people that have dedicated their lives to actually doing behavior modification for birds. So it's a science. So you have to actually realize, you have to look at the whole, monitoring the behavior of when the bird is picking. So now you can use technology. You can use like a pet cam. You can observe, So sometimes I've had birds that they'll pick the feather. They'll know the owner is leaving the house. So once they're cued, the owner gets ready, maybe puts their makeup on, dresses up, grabs the keys, bird is picking, right? So then you now know the bird is anxious that the owner is leaving the house, and it starts picking. So once you find out what the precedent behavior is, the antecedent, then you can actually address the picking itself. So we need that kind of information to help the owner figure out. So usually behavior modification, you need a lot of time and a lot of videos. Yeah, so identify like why the bird picks. So maybe the bird will pick, let's say when there's loud sounds. So thunder. Or let's say kids running around screaming, playing, then the bird starts pulling, preening, over preening, then we know, okay, to stop that behavior, maybe I know my kids are going to play, I'm going to put the music on, I'm going to dim the lights a little bit, bird's more relaxed, maybe cover part of the cage so the bird's not too stressed, So this is just an example of for example, for behavior modification technique. Okay, so foraging. You have to do it. Okay, so even if your bird's not picking, you have to do it. So very easy. I do it with my bird all the time. I'm very busy. I have 3 kids. I work full time. I don't have time to sit there in my green and tell him I love him all the time, right? So I want my bird to be independent. So I get things for him to do. I hide his food. He spends hours sometimes getting to the nuts. I make things challenging for him to. So he's busy, right? He loves shredding things. Thankfully, he's a boy, not a girl. So he shreds boxes. He shreds the towel of those paper towel rolls, and I crumple paper and I put things inside so that the bird is not just sitting on the perch waiting to be fed. So in the wild, you can imagine they spend hours looking for food. They're very food motivated, right? So birds are all about the prey species. Are all about survival. If I don't find food, I'm gonna die. Right, so no one's going to be giving them handouts, right? So birds are usually all about survival, and even though these birds are our pets, they're no different from the birds in the wild. Biologically, they're wired to actually kind of want to survive. Their need to look for food is very high. So why don't we make use of it? So I will encourage you if you can. Of course, I don't need to starve the bird. So obviously, you can have a small amount of food, but the prized food, the food that it really truly loves and would do anything for, shouldn't be given to it. Hey, go have it, and then that's it for the end of the day until the owner comes back and then pets it a whole bunch, and gives it all the stimulation, and then you wonder why it's bird picking. So we'll talk a little bit about medications in a bit. I guess collars. So now collars are available, like even online. It's really easy for people to purchase them. So I feel it's still like a band-aid. I think it's a restraint device. So like it's like putting a straight jacket on a person, but then not kind of addressing why is the animal, or in a human case, and why are you sick? Like why are you not feeling good? mentally, is there something that's lacking in your environment, or do you have a problem, an issue that I can help you with? So I feel a collar should only be used only if it's severe bleeding, mutilating case. So I feel that if you just put it on just because you are frustrated that your bird looks a certain way, and you feel like, oh, poor thing, its feather look like that, I'm gonna put the collar on so that its feather's gonna grow. Then I'll take it off maybe in a couple of months. But I'm not sure if ethically it can be justified, because then you're just kind of not allowing the bird to groom and express its natural behavior, which is preening, right? You're taking that away from the bird. So it's a debatable thing. Okay, so what is mutilation? Mutilation is really like cutting, so like the animal is now so frustrated, it makes these wounds on itself, which can be quite extensive. I've had some that actually was derived from injury. For example, a bird that picked its chest, but actually not only didn't know, but when it came in, I realized it actually split its pectorals because it had jumped. So poorly clipped feathers, heavy bird, African grey, jumped and hitting its chest so that the muscle split from the keel bone. So I had to obviously do a surgery. We trimmed the bone back, and then we actually pulled the muscle across, and actually closed the defect of the skin. First I put a little band-aid, covered the area for a while, lots of painkillers, lots of supportive care, and the bird never picked again. Right, so of course that was a good ending to a story, but not all of them end that well. So of course, if the bird is picking due to mutilating, due to hormonal impact, due to frustration, then I've seen wounds like this occur. It can be really bad unless you address it. Okay, so for mutilators, I guess we have to. That's something that you can't just leave it. Like you unfortunately need to put a collar. You have to treat the secondary infection. I usually give them like pain relief. So the common ones we use in birds are called butorphanol, meloxicam, gabapentin. So they target different pathways of pain. So you might ask, how come so many meds, right? Like you come to the vet and get like 3-4 meds. So they all do different things. So if you're trying to target pain, they call it a multimodal approach to pain. Your sensors. So you can't just give one pain relief. Sometimes you have to give enough to kind of take away the pain, and then the bird will stop. Okay, so initially a bit more meds, and then after that we'll slowly wean it down. Antipsychotic. So the old school one, the big one was called Haldol or haloperidol. So it is come from the human side of medicine. So these are drugs that they use in schizophrenia actually. So it can actually help the bird feel less stressed. I feel mainly it's less stress. So it can be given safely. The downside sometimes will be over sedation. So of course you have to titrate the dose. So when you give something strong like that, you have to make sure the bird doesn't get too zonked, right? So if it sleeps too much, fall off the perch, obviously they're like way too much medication, right? So another one is called amitriptyline. So amitriptyline, I guess it's a little bit less sedating. But it's a similar thing, I guess. I've also tried Prozac, so Prozac is another thing that we take from the human side of things, anti-depression. So all those drugs can be given to birds to actually reduce their anxiety. Okay, so custom collars. So sometimes we use things like a piece of plastic. It's very thin, it's light. And we make like a disc. We've used rolls. So either cloth rolls or foam rolls, and we put it along the neck of the bird so that the bird's neck is extended. So it really depends on where it's picking, right? So the discs are more important if the bird is picking its lower extremity, like the feet. If I'm just thinking about my chest, like the bird is picking its chest, it just needs like a little foam collar. I find the foam ones are a bit better because then, like you don't have this bulky thing that's going to smash into everything. Yeah, so they only have the spherical plastic ones now that are available that they're already made. You just click it on, put it on the neck of the bird. Yeah, so there are many things you can do. So of course the cloth ones, the one on the right where the bird's looking like it's wearing a dress. I know that's very commonly found online. The only downside, and I found a couple of these in my local clients, is that they get a secondary yeast infection. So imagine you're wearing a winter jacket in Singapore and you also have a down coat on. in addition to that, so it's really hot here. So if you're wearing a lot of clothes and you already have down, i.e. down feathers, then you're going to get really hot. Okay, so they'll get musty, so they get like a yeast growth. So I think that you have to turn the aircon on, so if your aircon on is 24 hours a day, you have to put the jacket on the bird. Yeah, I guess that's okay. But if you have no aircon, please try not to. All right, I think it's not fair to the bird. And I think off and on, you do have to air it out. Yes, so maybe give the bird a bath, put the fan on, let it dry out. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about behavior prompts in pet birds that could be the way we are treating our bird, and we don't realize it, right? So I've no doubt that all my bird clients love their birds, right? Obviously, they won't have the birds and they won't bring it to the vet for sure if they don't love them. But sometimes they have this thing called over bonding or inappropriate bonding. So where the bird might have a dominant behavior, unbeknownst to the client, I see it, they don't realize it, but the bird is super dominant. So it would jump on the animal, fly around the room, jump on the animal's shoulder, on the human's shoulder, and sit there, right? Like they are on top of the man's head, the woman's head, and they just sit there. And this is a dominant bird, right? So you don't want that necessarily. Of course, we want our birds to be happy, but you should be the one putting the bird there if you want to. Okay, but don't let the bird jump on there without you letting it, because this is a dominant position. So when it has a dominant position, then it will sometimes develop behavioral traits that are not ideal. Yeah, so of course it can be the biting, the screaming, feather pulling. So try not to do that. So I think engage in good training habits from young. Get a good handle. If you're not sure, you can get someone who's a savvy bird trainer to teach you, like, hey, how do I bring this bird in line? So it's a flying bird. It does whatever it wants. It swoops on my head. It jumps on my head. It jumps on my shoulder, and it won't actually be good for the bird long term, because it can lead to feather picking. So the other thing would be the picture down below. Where you have this woman and she's obviously kissing the bird, and the other one's like on her, and she's petting them, over their back. So we now know that those kind of behaviors, I guess, if it's excessive, it can lead to feather picking. So the bird should not be be given the opportunity to act as if it's a human pair bond. Because when you first purchase the bird, it's young, it thinks you're its mother, right, or father, which is fine. But after the age, maybe about 7 months, you start thinking about, hey, look, I need to find a mate. And obviously there'll be no other birds there, but it's human. And then, because it loves the human so much, it will start changing its affection and becomes no longer a parent-child bond. It will become more like a mate-to-mate bond. Yeah, so then that's when trouble starts. And of course, if you do things like, hand feeding from your mouth, you pet the bird excessively, then of course you're going to give the bird the wrong message. Okay, so poor understanding of flock mentality is I think, a downfall, I guess, of a lot of owners. So of course, it's less likely to happen if you have a lot of birds. So if you have a lot of birds, especially if they're all the similar or even same species, that's good. They don't even need to stay in the same cage. If let's say they don't love each other, they can be separate cages, but at least they have other birds and they're watching the other bird and they're seeing how one interacts with the owner. They will know that they're a bird. Okay, so a parrot is not a feathered dog. Okay, so if you want a dog, get a dog. They're not a dog. Okay, so a typical wild bird's day. Okay, so wild bird would forage, it would socialize, and it would spend time. If you talk about preening, okay, they would spend 7 to 8 hours a day doing it, right? So look at a picture of this beautiful African greys on the palm trees in Africa. They would do a lot of things, right? So when you don't have the socialization and you no longer have the foraging, you only left with feather care. Okay, so that's what happened with our pet birds. Suddenly, everything's focused on the feathers, and that's what they destroy. Okay, so what happens to pet bird? This is an extreme picture. I'm sure none of you would do this to your bird, but eating, okay, you put the food in there, eat in 5 minutes, right? Sunflower seeds, dump it in there, they eat it, they're done. Sleeping, they spend a lot of time maybe just sleeping, resting, cannot even stretch the wings, cannot do anything, not flying. And then what? Nothing else, right? There's nothing else to do. So adding foraging to the cage environment will slow down and prolong the eating intervals. Of course, having area to exercise. I don't really think that the bird should walk around your house, because I've also seen a lot of dangers where they pick up things off the floor and get sick. Okay, so if you have a bird room and you're bird proofing your house or your room, that's fine. Yeah, so I've seen amazing pictures where you have, people who hang branches in the ceiling of their house, and make these stations around the house for the bird to fly around and kind of forage, and they can exercise, and they have like these ropes, spiral ropes, where the bird can climb up, climb down, come, go to the ground, eat something, go back up, and then fly around. That'll be great, right? But of course, not everyone has that capability. But I think that would be nice to think about something, maybe not that extreme, something in between. Okay. So foraging is just a picture of a bird foraging. So it's flown down to the bottom in the grass and it's found something yummy to eat, right? So it's fun, it's like a challenge. So birds want challenges, okay? They're not lazy animals. They're extremely intelligent, and I think that we should challenge them more. Okay, so these are just some pictures. Of course, these are taken from the internet, and some of it are taken from, I guess, ex-clients. So this African grey is actually, I guess, being made, some cartons, 8 cartons that are empty, and they put food in between, okay, and they have these rattan toys, and you can stuff seeds or nuts inside. I think they're awesome, okay, or seagrass mats, that's another one that I also like to buy for my bird, and they actually just stuff food inside in between this netting, and the bird has to go through it. So nuts can also be given in the shell, so like walnuts and almonds in the shell, so the bird has to crack through it. And then you have like bins like this where they have all the things hidden, so there's like crumpled paper with nuts, and then they have like other toys, food toys, for the bird to kind of play with, and then like, oh, surprised, I found a nut, so this is really fun for birds. Okay, so foraging brings balance into a bird's life, and it decreases the stress-induced behaviors. It improves the strength and the dexterity, right? So they're picking things up, they're moving their legs, they'll get less arthritis. Why not? It decreases obesity. So I think when given a choice, of course, if you say if I give food in a bowl and I ask for it, and I ask the bird which one you want, of course you'll go for the bowl, right? Because they're going to be wired to survival. Because for them, I guess they would want to get the food, easy access. Okay, but of course, if you take that choice away, they will forage for sure, 100%. Okay, mental stimulation, that's another reason why foraging is good, and it teaches independent play. Okay, so the last point I want to bring out, I guess, is about UV light. So when our birds are indoors, okay, we have an apartment, we have blinds, curtains, and it's so hot, and everyone wants to put the aircon on. Our bird is dry, right? So now you have the humidity is being sucked out of the air. Windows are now covered, or maybe the glass is closed because the aircon is on. It will not get UV light. They're not plants. They won't absorb it through glass, okay? So the bird will get deficient, okay? And then you wonder why your bird's bones are brittle, why it fractures itself so much, or you wonder why its feathers look like this. So the reason is because birds naturally need sunlight, okay? So if you bring a bird out, great. This is a Quaker with a harness on, right? So that's good. I don't really like those things for their feet because I have seen fractures before. So if you want to use them, do be careful that the bird doesn't fly accidentally and have a longer, I guess, give to it, like maybe put a spring or something. Because if you accidentally pull it, yank it, it will fracture the leg. Or I've seen also a hip luxation where the hip actually came out the joint because the bird jumped and the chain actually kind of caught, and then the bird got injured. All right. So natural sun exposure, I guess 20 to 30 minutes, 2 to 3 times a week is enough, So it doesn't need like a whole bunch. Of course, we're all busy people. So if you can afford to do that, it's great. I think that, they call it like sunning the bird, So if you have open window, morning sun is good. Afternoon might be a bit hot. Never leave your birds unattended outside. There will be like, predators coming at them, hornbills, whatnot, so do be careful. Extreme heat over 30 degrees obviously will cause a heat stroke. Okay, so there are these lights that are called like UVB lights, so that you can purchase. They call them the Avian sun globes. So I think if your bird is on an all-seed diet, it lays a lot of eggs, you should really be giving some of it. Okay, because even though you're giving calcium, let's say your bird is laying eggs, but you're not giving lice, you're not going to be able to activate it. Okay, so they need both. They need the UV light to absorb vitamin D, and they need the calcium together to get strong, healthy bones. Okay, so if you do the lights, of course, you have to make sure that it's at the right recommended distance. Okay, and then of course, if the bird is like squinting, redness occurs and they're rubbing their face, maybe you might need to move it further up, okay, or stop the use for a while, re-examine it and see what's going on. And these bulbs need to be replaced every 6 months. Okay, so there are some that are available, I guess, more commonly in our country. They are called like Zoomed. Zoomed is a brand that makes also Avian Sun. If not, Hagen Exoterra also have Repticlo. So the reptile bulbs are fine as well for birds, even though it's labeled as reptile. I mean, to be honest, they're all the same. I think they're just a different marketing. Yeah, so I think I would just pick something that's not super strong. Okay, so I think a 5.0, so it goes from 2, 5, and then 10. Right? So try not to go the really high ones, because the high ones, the intensity of the UV light will be too strong. Okay, so for example, I'll just give you an example here. Zoomed is roughly about 20 centimeters. The Hagen, 30 to 38 centimeters from the bird's head. So that's how high it needs to be above the cage. Okay, so we've come to the end of the talk. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you learned a little bit about how to care better for your feathered friends. Any further questions? I think we have a Q&A later. I thank you all for your kind attention on a Saturday morning. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Rina, for the very insightful presentation. Let's move on to a quiz before going to the Q&A section. If you have any questions, please feel free to type it in the Q&A box. But first, let's go through a quiz to see if you have gained some knowledge from this presentation. So we have 3 questions today. The first question here. A 1-year-old Lutino cockatiel is pulling out its feathers under both wings and appears itchy. Which parasite should be ruled out? Is it A, fungus, B, giardia, or C, circovirus? We have a poll that should have just popped out right now, so you can click on the poll to vote your answer. Okay. Now let's see the answer to this quiz. The answer is actually A, fungus.
Sorry, this is wrong. The answer is giardia, B.
Giardia, okay. Okay.
Okay, B.
No worries. Let's go to the next question. Okay, second question here. How many hours a day should artificial light be used for an indoor pet parrot? Is it A, 3 hours, B, 7 hours, or C, 1 hour? This topic was just covered in the last part of the presentation. And you can vote your answer in the poll. Okay, and the answer is 3 hours. So let's see if you got it right. Next, third question. Which vitamin has been linked to poor feathering in pet birds? Is it A, vitamin C, B, calcium, or C, vitamin A? And the answer is C, vitamin A.
Yes, vitamin A.
So remember to give your parrots a good variety of food for a healthy diet. That's very important. Okay, so if you have any questions about this topic, please feel free to type it in the Q&A box. Meanwhile, while waiting for the audience to type, I do actually have a couple of questions on hand. So let me just ask that. So if I find my bird to be plucking, how long should I actually wait before I seek consultation with the vet?
I guess I would first try to figure out if the bird is unwell. So if it has any other signs of being ill, such as like it's fluffed up, it's dropped more than 5% of its body weight, there's reduced vocalization, reduced eating, then I would take it to the vet. I would say immediately. But if let's say it's otherwise status quo and that no diarrhea, no other medical symptoms, then you could give it maybe a few days to kind of see whether it resolves. Because I think if you nip it in the bud early, then sometimes it can kind of resolve more quickly. Whereas if the bird is already like no follicle growth because it's been peaking for a few years, I feel that I'm really kind of like at the back, I don't have that leeway to kind of help resolve things. So I don't think waiting a few years is good. Waiting a few months is already quite a lot. I guess I've had more often people come in with peaking for a few weeks. So I guess you can safely say it's medically looks fine. Maybe a few weeks will be the max.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Rina. So on that front, while preparing for this vet visit, is there any specific kind of information that we should prepare to, share with the vet if we want to consult about feather picking issues?
Yeah. So yeah, I would try to get information about when does it pick. So maybe getting some videos, to see when this behavior occurs. I think that would be very helpful. I guess pictures of the cage, pictures of like a more detailed, in-depth environmental information would be actually quite helpful for me. So I think sometimes we just have to kind of do the detective work while you're in the hospital and the clinic. But sometimes if the owner has really prepared things, then it does speed things up a little bit. Yeah. So of course, if it's been to like multiple places, then maybe consolidating all the medications that have been tried, or if let's say they've tried over-the-counter things, and let me know. So the first thing, of course, is like improving nutrition, right? So let's say you can start by maybe make sure the diet is correct. So now that if you listen to this talk, you can be like, hey, look, I've realized now the diet is wrong. Oh no, my bird's picking. Sure, transition it first. Then you can do that, right? Try introducing new foods, do some enrichment, give it some sunlight. Maybe spraying the bird, giving some baths and things because the air's very dry. You can do all those things first before coming to the vet.
Okay, thank you. That's very useful to know. We have nothing in the Q&A box yet. If you don't mind, I do have a couple of, maybe just one more question before we close the webinar. So earlier you talked about how some diseases may not be always, they can be easily transmissible, but it's not always very obvious sometimes if the bird has the virus. So do you think you could make a few comments about the safety of pet meetups? Because as you know, we do hold pet events. Even for Parrot Society ourselves, we attend many pet events and people bring their birds around. So are there any specific precautions that we should take, especially when meeting somebody who we don't know how their parrot's health condition is like?
Yeah. So the younger birds would be more likely to pick up circovirus. So after a certain age, I think the likelihood is quite low. So let's say you have a very young bird, like maybe just like an infant, so if you take an infant and you suddenly bring it to a kindergarten and everyone's shedding viruses and bacteria, then I think there's more chance the infant's going to get sick. So maybe it would be prudent not to do that. Maybe you can wait a little bit until your baby bird is a bit older before you kind of do the meetups. So let's say now you have an adult bird and you want to join a free flying club, or you want to go just meetups and bring a bird and hang out. I think bringing your own stand would be good. I think then at least the bird has ability in a way to get away from other birds, and also it knows that's its safe zone. And also, I guess, through contact, so sometimes if the bird, let's say another bird is shedding, like it has diarrhea or something, and then it goes and steps on another bird's diarrhea, then it will get sick. So, yeah, so I think that they can spread infection, some of it through dander and being airborne, but I think the bird would have to be sick for it to do that. So I guess if the organizer of the meet at least eyeball the birds that come through the door first. So if they have a sus looking like quiet bird that's fluffed up and like looking not so great, maybe they could politely tell the owner, hey, look, maybe is your bird okay? Maybe if you don't mind, we'll have you sit a little bit further away with your bird, So yeah, so I think it has to be usually, I guess, transmissible. They have to be either touching the beak, touching poo, or through feather dander. So if it's far enough away that the dander doesn't go into its face and doesn't get inhaled, then you should be okay.
Okay, great. That's very useful to know. I see we do have someone who raised a hand. Sam Sia, would you like to unmute yourself to ask a question?
Hello. Can you hear me? Hi, sorry. I tried to send a message on the question, but I can't seem to get that through. I can just read out my question.
Okay.
Yeah, it was just about like with beak and feather disease, how would you manage that with a captive bird, and like what would you look up for, and how would that sort of impact their kind of quality of life, giving like with the reduced immune function and stuff?
So is it confirmed by blood test that it has beak and feather?
Yeah, let's say if it was positive for beak and feather.
Okay. So I would always retest, because sometimes they can eliminate it. So a positive test should be followed up, I guess, 2 weeks later with another test. So if the bird is able to eliminate it, then you're good, So if it still remains positive, then you just have to maybe treat infections quickly, because if its immunity is poor, usually these ones would have maybe the white blood cell count would be that good, so maybe it's getting the blood test done fairly often would help, just to monitor the white blood cell number. If it has diarrhea and things don't just wait and see. I would treat it. I would more aggressively treat the bird, because sometimes they can get really bad infections and can't recover from them. And definitely those kind of birds shouldn't go to group mates. It shouldn't have exposure to wild birds. I would just keep it in its bubble. And I wouldn't get new birds either, because then it's not fair, to the new bird that you get exposed to it. Immunity, vitamin A. I've also done shiitake mushroom extract, echinacea. Those are things that can boost the immunity. Yeah, but I think the lifespan, unfortunately, might get a bit shortened. But it could be, it doesn't mean a few months though. Yeah, I've had them live for years with circovirus.
Cool, thank you. I also had another question, not related to this, but I'm just wondering if you do accept final year vet students during rotation in your clinic at all.
You can email us later.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, no problem.
Okay, we do have a couple of questions in the Q&A box, just two for now. First one, if a bird has liver issues and start plucking, is it reversible for it to stop plucking by solving the liver issue?
Yeah, I think so, because the liver is, it's an organ that metabolizes toxins in the body, and it also affects the growth of the beak and the feathers, so it's a very vital organ. So focus not on the feathers, but focus on the liver. What's going on with the liver? Why is it not well, right? Is it fatty liver? Is it bacterial hepatitis? So I would try to work out the underlying reason why the bird's liver is not functioning well. Yeah. So yes, if you fix that, then potentially yes, the feather growth would get better.
Thank you. And we do have one last question here. Is there any estimated duration for new feather plucking lovebirds to recover?
Well, I think if it stops pulling its feathers, then it should come back in a couple of weeks, really. So I think the cycle, so it depends, right? So if it destroyed its feather follicles, the answer will be never, right? But if it hasn't destroyed its feather follicles, then within a couple of weeks, we should start seeing the little baby ones coming out. Yeah, so good luck with that. I hope that it will grow its feathers.
Thank you. Yeah, I think plucking is always a very tricky topic, but today's webinar has been really, really insightful. Thank you so much, Dr. Rina, for sharing so many different insights. And also for all our participants for calling in early on a Saturday morning. Thank you so much for joining our call. Do feel free to follow us on Instagram at Parrot Society SG or at Beecroft SG Vet, and stay tuned for our future events. Thank you, everyone, and I hope to see you soon.
Yeah. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.